I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. This land was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I guess you could call me a second generation Greek Australian, but with a twist. Most Greek Australians were brought up in the Orthodox Church. Our family was an exception. My dad converted to evangelical Christianity around the age of 18, became a church minister, and then he decided to have 5 annoying little children, me being one. It was a conservative household though, and I guess that conservatism, which effectively pushed me away from religion, opened my mind to a much wider and beautiful quest to understand the world. Solidarity is about what you do, not who you are. This quote by R.L. Stevens, a Labour organiser based in Chicago, serves as both a starting and ending point for my talk. In essence, it sums up my politics. It brings forth the importance of class, that is, fundamentally, working class struggle and organisation against exploitation, oppression, racism, sexism, and all the other shit that stems from an unjust system. Or better put, thanks to that old bearded friend of ours, which some of you may be aware of, freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guild master and journeyman, in a word, oppressor and oppressed. But we cannot combat the wrongs of the system by atomising individuals based on reified notions of identity, where only a possessor of a given identity can speak about the lived experiences of that particular identity. This inevitably forms a hierarchy of privileges where checking one's privilege has now replaced solid political argumentation, debate, and analysis. This has never been the history of working class emancipation or solidarity with the oppressed, nor should it ever be. We share the same interests as all those who suffer, so why not challenge the status quo as a collective? This portrait of a Syrian refugee exemplifies my point on why class politics matter, and why it is vital for artists dealing with socio-political issues to once again bring it to the forefront of our artistic endeavours. The media and the smaller liberal types are hell-bent on portraying refugees based on their occupation or skill sets and how they have or will be contributing to the economy. Who cares? They are human beings, their homelands ravaged by war, directly and indirectly at the hands of our governments. I don't support refugee rights on the basis of whether they are doctors or physicians, rather on my care for humanity in general. This is another refugee from Idomeni camp, north of Greece, which is just last year was shut down by the Greek authorities. This message is clear and concise. Open the borders, let us in. Refugees, Muslims and immigrants have been a main focal point for media and politicians alike. They are used as scapegoats. They are demonised and portrayed as lesser people, aliens from a place far, far away. So far, in fact, that Western ideals have yet to reach their foreign lands. The only ones lucky enough are those draped in military gear and strapped with a gun, like these dudes here. Except, surprisingly or unsurprisingly, they are patrolling the Louvre and militarising the streets of Paris. And it's not just French troops that this is directed towards. Surrounding them are some facts about France's long and bloody history of colonialist conquests and military interventions. Structural racism is inherent in a system built on a division of classes. How would armies invade those supposed foreign lands? How would bosses find cheap sources of labour? What is also inherent, and which racism continuously plays an integral part of, is a system that leads to massive economic and social crises. The economic crisis of 2008, the worst since the Great Depression, began in the American subprime mortgage industry, but quickly reverberated throughout the world market, wiping trillions of dollars off stocks and bonds. Millions of homes were foreclosed alongside job losses and huge attacks on social securities. Banks were bailed out at the expense of ordinary people. Greece, along with much of southern Europe, was one of the countries hardest hit. Beginning in 2010, the government began the first of 3 mass austerity measures aimed at, essentially, shifting the debt burden onto workers and sucking them dry in order to continue to receive financial aid from the evil troika. If you want a clear-cut example of objective class war, then look no further to Greece, democracy at its finest. Wages were drastically cut, huge tax increases for small businesses, the privatisation of public assets and a tax on pensions and the welfare state. This has been government policy to this day. In fact, a new round of measures were just introduced, furthering the woes of the Greek people. And people might have seen riots once again occurring in Greece. One of the social groups hardest hit by the crisis has been pensioners. This is a portrait of a beautiful yaya, or yaya in Greek, grandmother English, who was living rough on the streets of Athens. Along the outside of her battered body is a written statement released by the Committee to Abolish Third World Debt 20 days before the election of the left-wing government Syriza back in 2015. It reads, and it's a bit hard to read there, to support the Greek people and the Greek left in their struggle to liberate the country from the grip of creditors and from the dictatorship of the markets is now the duty not only of grassroots activists, but of every European citizen that rejects a Europe of austerity that produces misery, racism and barbarism. Also depicted as my girlfriend would call them, potato characters, those little characters down there, who are collectively holding her up under immense economic and social pressures. Like a lot of my art, I always strive to creatively depict the fighting spirit of the masses. This illustration also depicts a street battle going on, the police lurking in the shadows. In 2015, I was lucky enough to be in Greece during the referendum, which gave people a vote on whether or not the ruling government should pass a fresh round of austerity measures. This was a hugely important period of Greece and the rest of Europe. A yes vote meant another nail in the coffin for the masses. A no, or hockey in Greek, vote would stick it to the fucking ruling elites and would potentially pave the way for a left-wing alternative to the neoliberal order. Hundreds of thousands turned up to rallies leading up to the vote. Greek songs of resistance from past movements, though never forgotten, blared through speakerphones. Left-wing musicians and speakers inspired and enthralled the protesters. Debates were lively. And even though I didn't speak Greek, you could sure as hell tell issues were being discussed with vigour and enthusiasm. Greeks tend to show a lot of emotions in their facial expressions and hand movements. And these were photos taken during the period leading up to the referendum. I saw hundreds of thousands on the streets. And that was when the no camp won the referendum, even though 1 to 2 days later the government then went against the people and still implemented mass austerity measures. This portrait of a protester from definitely the biggest demonstration I've ever been to may seem to contradict that notion. That is, Greeks tend to show a lot of emotions. But there was something about her gaze that caught my eye. Maybe it was the fact she saw a camera pointing directly at her face and got a bit pissed off. Or maybe I saw a stare of cautious optimism towards an uncertain future. Whatever it was, I took the photo. The woman had attended the demonstration. Regardless of how I or anyone else may interpret it, being there was more than enough. Her actions and the thousands standing with her protesting is what makes the artwork important. Those little potato characters I so cherish are the ones standing with her. They are the immigrants and refugees organising and fighting back against fascist gang attacks. The youth who once dreamt of a decent job and a comfortable future, skirmishing with riot police, unionists and workers, young and old, who will not take further attacks on their livelihoods, standing in solidarity side by side. Class politics has never been more important, and I believe artistic action is always synonymous with collective action. It is part of a wider struggle against the inequalities we all face and can be both beautiful and important in the fight for a better world. But we cannot simply reduce our want to speak out to an artistic persona, a painting on a canvas or an illustration. Solidarity is about what you do, not who you are. Recognising this and the relationship between artistic action and collective action is what motivates me to not only produce the art I do, but for the artwork and I to be part of a much wider movement that starts from the grassroots up. I hope it will for you too. Thank you very much.